This is episode 126 of the Trauma Coaching for Latter-day Saints podcast, when you don't want to calm down. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm on a mission to help members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints heal from trauma. I'm on my healing journey, and I'm a triple certified life coach. Take a deep breath, slip your AirPods in, and come on a walk with me to learn how to heal and find lasting joy. Okay, so something that I was surprised to learn in this trauma healing journey is that sometimes we don't want to calm down. And we are taught from a very young age, don't be angry, don't be upset, calm down. Those kinds of things, those kinds of messages that we get from our family, from society, that being calm is the preferred way to be at all times. But this is not true. And that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode. It is true that long term, we want to live mostly in a calm, creative, connected space. It's what we would call our window of tolerance. I believe I have an episode about that. And so it's not totally untrue, but it's not true that we always want to be calm. Sometimes we are in a stress response and we want to be in a stress response. We need to be in a stress response. Stress is not always bad, right? I know most of you have probably heard that before. And oftentimes it's when we're in this high activated state that people want to tell us to calm down, come on, just take some deep breaths, those kinds of messages, that's when we don't want to. And if we allow our bodies to do what our body naturally wants to do, it will show us the way. It's only when we believe the messaging, believe the sentences, the things that people are telling us through our logical mind, that then we sort of fight against our normal and natural instinct. When we are in an activated state, we actually want to move. We want to move our bodies to metabolize that energy. That's like how we get through the energy. And when we try to calm down from that activated state, that's kind of like what causes a freeze response, right? And the freeze response is the core of trauma. Not always, it's not completely that simple. I mean, I know you've probably seen on social media and things, some ways to kind of calm your nervous system, right? For example, I see several people out there saying, like, when you're in that activated state, take 2 deep inhales and then 1 long exhale. So it sounds like this. And it is true. It's true that if you calmly breathe, you exhale longer than you inhale, it sends a signal from your body to your brain that you are safe, and it will calm your nervous system down. And that's a great tool to use at times. You just need to know when to use it and when to actually metabolize the energy. And I would say, and I'm totally not an expert, I'm becoming an expert, but I'm still in the learning phase. I would say that normally the first option would be to metabolize the active energy through movement if you can. Now, we can't always do that, right? Sometimes we're in a car, we're stuck in a meeting or something like that. So that's where you would go to some other different exercises as sort of secondary responses. Okay. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to talk about more examples of what to do and things to look for. But first, I want to talk about some very recent examples in myself and in a couple of my clients, because I can hear people out there thinking like, wait, when do I know when to do this, right? So before we start talking about the how-tos, I want you to have a little bit more context of what I'm talking about with this activated state, this state of being when we don't actually want to calm down. So I had a client earlier this week who gave a little backstory about something that happened with her kid who was, I think, was 9 years old. And she just was really confused and actually she was very frustrated. But it was really interesting because as she was telling me sort of the backstory, her demeanor, her tone of voice was telling me like, it's not really that big of a deal. I just don't really know how to deal with this. And so I pointed that out and she said, oh, but on the inside, I'm shaking and I'm like, I can feel the frustration, right? So that is something that I wanted to highlight because so many of us, especially women, we hide our active states. And so I want you to just notice that. Notice when your body is actually really shaky and really alert and kind of just like on, and you don't want anyone around you to know. That's kind of a little side note actually. But so then I asked her, like, okay, tell me about that. Tell me about the shakiness. Tell me about the frustration. And she blurted out, I just want to march out there and yell at someone. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we got some anger here. We've got some frustration here. So I asked her if it was available to her to march or to scream. And she said, well, I'm feeling a little embarrassed. So I said, well, would you like us all, because this was in a group setting, would you like us all to turn off our videos? And she said, actually, I think it would be better if I just turned off my video. So I said, great, go ahead and do that. You can mute yourself as well. And I want you to just march in place or march around your room. And if you have a pillow or something, like let yourself scream into the pillow. Because that's what her body said it wanted to do, was march out there and yell at someone. Now, we don't have to yell at someone. We don't always have to discharge our active energy toward another person. So I wanted her body to just go through this process of, oof, I need to march and I need to yell. So she turned her video off. She muted herself for about 60 seconds and she marched and she yelled and she came back on and she said, oh, actually, that feels really good. And we could all just tell how letting herself march and yell really brought her down out of that high frustration and anger state. Right now, it doesn't mean that her body stayed that way the rest of the day. It might come back in waves. But the point here is to notice what our bodies really want to do and then give them the outlet to actually do those things. That is what I would love for you to take from this podcast episode, is to notice when you're in those activated states. Honestly, it's not just for the activated state. It's for when you're in shutdown. It's for any state of your nervous system. It's to kind of continually be checking in with yourself and noticing, where am I? How am I feeling? What do I need? But especially with these activated states, the kind of high anger, high energy, it could be fear, it could be nervous, those types of feelings. Oftentimes, what I'm noticing with my clients, with myself, is that we try to sort of put it away and hide it. I think it's a little bit, I guess that's true for the freeze response as well. When we just want to shut down, we have thoughts like, oh, I can't just lay here and do nothing, right? So it is true we want to hide those other states too, but I think it's even more so. My gut says it's like more so for women in these sort of frustrated anger states, because we're socialized to believe that a good girl, smiles and is calm and is kind and all of those things. So then we just end up ignoring our bodies when we're in these high activation states. Okay, client example number 2. I had a client talk about she has a daughter who's needing to make a decision about college. She's a high school senior, and she was trying to help her daughter just kind of talk through some things. And the daughter was just like, it's no help. I don't like talking to you guys because it's no help. And as we were just sort of slowing down the process, picking apart, like, what's the actual problem here? I said, and my client actually mentioned, sometimes I wonder if she just wants me to tell her, yeah, you're right. You made a mistake. That was stupid of you. You didn't do this or you didn't do that. And now you're living with the consequences, right? And so I kind of brought it back to that. I was like, maybe she does want to fight. Maybe there's some activation there and she's sort of like picking a fight. So then we started talking about this idea of like when we pick fights, right? And the next day, my client came to me, messaged me and said, yeah, I noticed last night, like, I don't think she had the awareness that she was the one picking the fight, but she was standing her ground. She had another kid saying like, "Hey mom, I'm going to stay out later than I expected." And my client mom was like, "Nope, no, you're not." And she just stood her ground, right? She had her son who is supposed to practice piano for 10 minutes and he practiced for like 3 minutes. And she was like, that wasn't 10 minutes. And he threw a big fit, right? So there are some things happening where normally she would have just been like, okay, fine, you can stay out however long you want. Or I'm not going to say anything to him. That was 3 minutes, not 10 minutes on the piano, right? She was used to being very passive and not kind of standing her ground or speaking up. And so I pointed out to her that I was like, yeah, you're sort of, I wonder from our coaching yesterday if you've given yourself permission to fight a little bit, right? Like that it's not necessarily wrong to fight. You know, obviously we're not talking about landing punches or hitting each other like physically fighting. We're talking about like giving ourselves a place to let that energy out, right? A safe place to let that energy out. And she said, oh, that's a really good insight. I didn't realize that I was the one kind of picking the fight, that by me standing my ground, I was saying, I'm willing to wrestle you on this, right? So that's another example of maybe you have some kind of rule or boundary that you're not backing off of like you possibly would normally do. And the third example I'm going to take from my own life, which I was in my certification that we meet weekly, and I was getting coached in front of our coach. You know, this was sort of a demonstration, a practice for the person who was coaching me. And, you know, that's how it goes. Everybody volunteers to be the client, and so that other people can volunteer to be the coach and get feedback on their coaching. And at first, I had said something like, I don't want to go to shut down. That's sort of my normal, and I always do that, and I just don't want to. But honestly, like I was feeling like tired. This heaviness in my body, I could really feel intensely. And so my coach had me kind of hold my head in my hands and just, be there for a minute. And as that was happening, I noticed sort of a sound, but it wasn't like an out loud sound. It was sort of like a mental sound, right? This sort of hissing or buzzing sound, kind of like an electricity sound. And looking back now, I think it was kind of the beginning of my active response really coming online. And then all of a sudden I stood up, or I sat up because I had my hands, or my head in my hands. And I just was really hot. I felt this heat from like the top of my head, down my face, down my neck, down my chest, into my belly, down my back as well. And I had a sweater on that day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so hot. Like I want to like take my sweater off. And I was like, I'm not going to do that on camera here. But it was a few minutes of this like intense heat. And I think my coach, my colleague, got a little bit flustered, and she kind of sat with me for a little bit, a couple more minutes. And then she asked, like, does this feel like a good place to stop? And I was like, no, it's not a good place to stop. I don't want to stop. I am like in the middle of this. Right. And so then she said, okay, well, what do you feel like you want to do? And I said, I think I need to stand up. And so I stood up, and I was kind of like bouncing from foot to foot, sort of leaning back and forth, shaking a little bit. It wasn't like intense shaking, but just sort of wiggling my fingers back and forth, letting my legs move a little bit. And after doing that for a couple of minutes, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I think I can sit back down now. right? So those are 3 examples of when we don't actually want to calm down. I didn't want her to stop coaching me and then sit back in my chair and just be like, okay, carry on to the next thing. And honestly, the next several minutes, even after we did stop, I was still like the heat was coming back and I was still kind of having to just let my body go through the process it was going through. Those are just a few examples. It could look like anything, but sometimes it might just be like, oh, I just have the urge to, and then fill in the blank. Run or fight in some way. It could be yell, because yell is a fight response. It could be like, I want to punch something, like I want to punch a wall or, something like that. Sometimes we hear our kids saying that. And or it could be like noticing yourself like picking little fights, like being like, no, I'm not going to let you get away with that. Like client number 2, right? Just to give you some context, those are some examples. That's maybe what it could look like, but it could also look very different for you. What we're really looking for here when we are in this activated state and we don't want to calm down. In fact, I did want to mention what happens when you're like frustrated or angry and someone says, just calm down. It almost makes us more frustrated or angry, right? That's a clue. Like, I don't want to calm down right now. Even if it's ourselves telling us to calm down, if you feel some resistance or you're like, no, I don't want to. I feel like I need to like go walk around, or I just want to go out for a walk, or I need to go for a run, or whatever it is for you, start noticing when your body is like, no, we want to move, right? And what we're really looking for here is a discharge, is the felt sense of like, ah, right? Like when you've lifted weights or when you've gone for a run, and then at the end of your run, you're just like, ugh. So just notice that. That's what we're really going for. We want to move our bodies until we get to that sort of shift inside of ourselves. I think the easiest thing to do is walking. Walk until you don't feel like walking anymore. I am a walker and I'm not so much of a runner. But the last couple of weeks, I've been out on my walks and I've felt like, I think I'm going to run a little bit. And I might talk about this in a future episode, but I'm noticing more and more that I'm coming out of a freeze response, out of kind of a chronic freeze where my body wants to live in the shutdown and the slowdown. I'm noticing I have an urge to lift weights. I have an urge to run, kind of like taking my movement up a level. So you might be a runner. You might really enjoy running. That's kind of always my first thing, like walking or running. Sometimes on my client calls, I ask if it's available to them. And what I mean by, is this available to you, is, do you want to do this? And how do you feel about actually doing this on our call? And I just have them pace around as we coach, right? If there's a lot of active energy, that's my ideal. Now, sometimes they say, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to force anyone to do anything they don't want to do. But that would be a more of an ideal, where I work over Zoom so that I can see your facial expression, your body language, but I can do phone calls as well. I just have to rely more on asking you questions of what's happening now. What is your body doing? Right. But walking and running are always my kind of first thing. Just like get up and move around your environment. This is such a great idea. If you work in an office or you work from home, about every hour, to encourage yourself to just take a lap or two around the kitchen, living room, around the office, whatever it is, to just kind of move your body. Studies show that we really are supposed to be moving our bodies about every 16 minutes. And I don't think most of us do that. Okay, so that's kind of the first place I normally start, but it doesn't have to be that. We could just, sometimes what will come up, and this has come up for me, is a trembling or a shaking sensation. We could just like let ourselves tremble or shake. I like to have my clients shake their hands, or like just like shake out their arms and their hands. That's another great thing to do if you don't have a lot of space to kind of move around. Or even like if you're on a call or in a meeting, you can sort of like wiggle your fingers or shake your hands under the table. The other thing that I recommend, I just recommended this to a group of my clients. We were talking about when they couldn't sleep. There was somebody that had mentioned, she struggles with insomnia and she's like, what do I do? Like, my brain says just keep laying down and try to go to sleep. But I asked, well, what do you want to do? Right. And she's like, well, I feel like I should just like get up and do something. And so I said, well, why don't you? And that's where we have all the messaging. Well, but it's midnight and I really should just be trying to sleep and I don't want to wake anybody else up and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I said, well, I understand that, not wanting to wake other people up. Do you think you could get up and press against a wall as if you had to move that wall? So this is something that requires core body strength. It requires us to engage our muscles. It doesn't take very much space or time or noise, right? To go press against the wall. That's another exercise you can do. And I always recommend to like keep the connection with your body. Notice, like really feel your muscles engaging until you feel that shift, until you feel that like, oh, okay, I think I'm okay now. I don't need to press against the wall. And then keep going with whatever it is you're going. It usually only takes 1 or 2 minutes, maybe less. And I mentioned this one before as well, screaming. Now, we have lots of thoughts about screaming out loud for no reason, right? If you can allow yourself to do that, I say by all means do it. If you're alone in your house and you're not worried about neighbors hearing you scream or anything like that, then just scream. Now, I myself, that's not available for me. I'm like, I either can't for some reason or I don't want to. Some clients feel more comfortable getting a pillow and screaming into the pillow so that they just have that sort of added security of like, okay, no, nobody's really going to hear this. If that even isn't available, you can imagine yourself screaming, or you can just do a little, like not letting the full scream out, but sort of going through the motions as much as you can. So we've got walking or running, shaking, pressing into a wall, screaming out loud into a pillow, imagining it, whatever you can, whatever level you are comfortable with. Really, any form of exercise, lifting weights, yoga, any kind of movement, right? Stretching, all of those things will help metabolize energy. And again, we want to just keep the connection to your body, keep the connection to really feeling your muscles engage and looking for that internal sense of like, ah, okay, that feels better, right? Those are a few exercises that you can use to help you discharge that active energy. Now, I want to talk for a minute or two about that, like, that, like, ooh, I feel better now, which is what I would call the discharge, right? I mean, we're discharging the energy. It's sort of that let down, that like relaxation. Things to notice that kind of just because they can doesn't mean they are, but they can be representing a discharge of energy. The first one is tears. When tears come up, when we cry, we're actually discharging energy. Almost all of my clients feel embarrassment or some kind of insecurity around crying in front of me. It's completely normal. I have also felt this in front of my family members or my coaches, but tears mean healing. That's what I always think when I'm with my clients, that tears signify that something is shifting and changing, something is healing. The next thing is breath. Like if we have like a sigh or a yawn, those things can be significant of an active discharge. Back to my example of how I felt that heat. Heat can be a signal of active discharge. Vocalizing or screaming can be a signal of active discharge. But what we're really looking for is that internal sense. And it's hard to describe. Sometimes with this somatic work, it's kind of beyond words, right? That sense of like, and in fact, one somatic exercise I had my clients do in my group is the audible sigh, which I feel silly doing this, but it's like when you go, and how does that feel? Like, just try that right now. When I did this in my group, many of the members were like, why does that feel so good? And the reason why it feels so good is because we're holding back this active response so often without even realizing it. And when we do that vocal sigh, it's like letting something go, right? It's this kind of coming back to calmness, getting back to that window of tolerance. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for almost like, oh, I like feel tired now, or it's not necessarily a tired, but just a surrender or a release of some kind, right? So it's going to look different for everyone, but that internal sense of like, oof, okay, I don't need to run anymore. I don't need to walk anymore. I don't need to cry anymore. It's just, I feel better. The book Burnout, that's the name of the book, Burnout, by authors Emily and Amelia Nagoski. They are sisters. I just read it for the second time. I think the first time I didn't finish it. It's a really great book about the stress response and how to metabolize stress on a daily basis. They give lots of great hands-on tools to think about. They also kind of couch it in the context of our society and, a patriarchal society, right? The patriarchy, but I do recommend that book. It's a great book to read. I wish I could give you a link, but I'm not an affiliate of any kind. But that book will give you lots of hands-on ideas of how to metabolize this active energy. So that was a lot today. I spoke for much longer than I expected to. Yeah, just remember that we don't always want to calm down and that there are healthy, appropriate ways to metabolize our active energy. I have one private coaching spot open. My group is closed right now, but you can get on my email list if you want kind of the latest information about that. I will be opening it back up in June or July, probably July timeframe. But if you're interested in coaching with me, I have one spot open. I have 8 private client spots, and there is currently one open. I'll have one or two more, I think, in May or toward the end of May. So if you're interested in that, if you want more support in what we talked about today, go to my website, danitabrummer.com, and schedule a free session. I always do a free session so that you can experience what coaching with me is like, because I might not be your coach. And I want you to experience that in order to say like, oh no, this doesn't feel like a good fit. Or yes, this does feel like a good fit. Either way. And if we're not a good fit, I totally do not take that personally. I have several people who do free sessions and then they don't hire me, and that's fine. Like, whatever. But you might need to just experience it a little bit and then think about it for a while and then maybe come back later, or maybe you go somewhere else. That's fine. So if we do a free session together and you love it and you think you want to move forward, then we do a consultation where we talk about like the logistics of everything, and we just go from there. So it's really no pressure. And I just want to help as many people as I can to heal from trauma. That's enough for now. And so are you. Thank you for listening, sharing, and leaving ratings and reviews. If you're ready to address your own trauma with my support, go to danitabrummer.com to schedule a free trauma assessment call. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.